Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I'd like to start off all of our shows recognizing we actually have a global audience. So it's lunch in Seattle. It's mid-afternoon on the East Coast. It's early evening, and I know who you are in Dublin listening, so it's early evening over in London, Dublin, GMT 0, UTC 0. And then if we go all the way over to Asia, if you're over in Australia, thank you for getting up very early to participate in today's webinar. And that's how we roll, folks. This is the SMB Nation MSP Tech Talk series. This is spring quarter. We're starting to turn the corner on spring quarters, you might imagine. It's the season of dads and grads. And we resemble that. We have a couple more after this, and we'll call it good for spring quarter. We have just completed laying out summer quarter. Summer quarter marches to the beat of a different drummer. As you may recall, college was very much the same way. So we're exploring some interesting topics this summer. You'll get some information on that. And I know that we were just having a sidebar conversation. We have listeners that will be on their way to both DataCon and Automation Nation in the next week or so. I will miss both. My oldest son is graduating as an aerospace engineer at Cal Poly, so going to have to sit out both shows this year. But I've got Lockdown, CompTIA, ChannelCon in late July, early August in Washington, D.C. Boy, howdy, that's humid. With that said, use a question features for asking your questions. Let's get to the good stuff. Want to introduce Mike Semel. Mike, welcome back to MSP Tech Talk. You have been a good friend. Oh, and before we do that, Mike, on the bottom of your screen, shout out to the sponsors, and we're going to talk about them throughout the course of the event. We have, I still call it eFolder, but eFolder Accent, Intermedia, and SolarWinds. Thank you for sponsoring this academic series so we can have some really sincere talks with a tip of the hat to our underwriters that make it all possible. Mike, please introduce yourself, and let's knock out where we're at and where we're headed today, and then away we go, my friend.
Thanks, Harry. It's great to be here. So this is Mike Semel from Semel Consulting. For those of you that don't know me, I was an IT business owner and a managed service provider for about 30 years, and I now own Semel Consulting. We focus on cybersecurity and compliance. I've got a background in compliance. I was the chief information officer for a hospital and for a K-12 school district, and I was the chief operating officer for one of the early online backup companies. What we're going to talk about today is GDPR, which may or may not affect all of you. I know it's affected your inboxes since it's affected mine with all the new privacy policy changes recently. But we're going to talk about GDPR, which is kind of like the new HIPAA. But I'm going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, why you should care, and what you should do.
Thank you, Mike. And if you could advance to the next slide, my friend, let's have a talk up front with eFolder/Accent. Robert, I know you're going to correct me. I lead with eFolder. Let's talk about that just for a second. What's up with the co-branding post-acquisition? Then I have a couple questions for you.
Well, Harry, it's we get a lot of questions about it, and right now we're going down. We brought together two strong organizations, and we're currently in the process of integrating those across the company, both kind of on the back office side as well as with the front teams as well. And right now we're just embracing both as we continue to kind of let the dust settle and make some decisions around kind of what our long-term brand's going to be.
Yeah, fair enough. Brand transition is a completely legitimate exercise in the acquisition scenario. So get it, and we'll see where the ball bounces. Robert, want to ask you about hurricane season. It's after June 1st. And last year was a stark reminder. It's always easy to think, well, it's not going to happen to me. It hasn't happened in years. They're actually predicting a fairly robust hurricane season. That's a BDR story. What is your story when it comes to natural disasters?
We have, it's kind of right timely with the Accent eFolder question, because when we brought in Accent, we essentially created a pillar of business continuity solutions. And we're already starting to work with partners, kind of preparing for these upcoming storms. With both Replibit and BRC, they both have some strengths that we bring to the table. Replibit with a very strong on-site replication of premium solution, cutting down on a lot of maintenance and providing the SLAs to help you and your clients sleep better at night. With BRC, it's has a more diverse realm of kind of what's backing up from a disaster recovery, and it is truly a disaster recovery as a service solution. So for those partners out there whose clients, and minutes truly mean tangible dollars, BRC is a really strong solution, especially as we think about hurricane season and going off-site for virtualization needs. BRC, can have the ability to put an entire office and entire servers or farms of servers up in the cloud, virtualized and running, so your clients truly have no uninterrupted business. And with that being the case, talking about hurricane season, what we do engage with our partners a lot is really testing those cloud virtualizations, and we are able to test on both the Replibit and BRC sides in advance of any real needs. So if you're one of our partners today and you want to make sure that you're in Hurricane Alley and you want to make sure that those systems are ready to go, you can just call in and we can work with you to test those environments.
There we go. And Robert, let me just do a little housekeeping. Folks, if you joined a couple minutes late, you are on the right MSP Tech Talk segment. The topic is GDPR. Today we're mixing up how our agenda, and we're hearing from one of three sponsors up front who generously underwrite and make this academic series possible. Robert, I'm going to throw in lava as part of that whole mix and other natural disasters. Hey, quickly before we go, you have a podcast series that's well regarded. It's MSP. I might get it wrong. Is it MSP Ignite or MSP Ignition?
MSP Ignition. Yeah, there's a lot out there in the marketplace, and as a vendor, bringing solutions to our partners and a robust suite at this point in time with providing data protection in a lot of different ways. We work with partners and we learn a lot about their challenges on a daily basis, not just around data protection, but around profitability, around how to market, how to sell. So what we've done is we've actually brought in a gentleman who was a previous MSP owner. He worked, like you mentioned ChannelCon up in DC. Tom Watson, who is our vice president of MSP best practices, actually owned an MSP up in the DC area for about 15 years. Yeah, and so he knew Matt Nachtraub, our CEO. They've both got a long history within the IT channel, and so Tom joined us in that role and really committed to bringing MSP Ignition to life. So we've been working with him on the marketing side and put together these webcasts and podcasts and really bringing the value really in two flavors, both in the form of best practices around calculators, running your business, really bringing value to the bottom line. And subsequently on the sales side, we've brought in, we have some private equity helping invest in our company, and we get a lot of those resources. So one of their sales best practice directors has been working with us throughout this year, one episode per month, where it talks about selling better for the MSP and really catering a program around how to sell your MSP services a little bit better.
Yeah. No, it's a respected series, folks. You can click off of that at efolder.net. Robert, appreciate your time, my friend. If you don't mind, we're going to hop into the good stuff on GDPR. I hope you can stay with us, by the way. It not only is it a timely topic, but I just want to say that we actually scheduled it after the May 25th deadline based on our experience with XP end of life, server, O3 end of life, small business server end of life, that we have discovered that our demographic, our MSP personas, unfortunately, many of them don't wake up until the deadline passes. So there you go, Robert.
Yeah, that's life. And you know what? The only thing I like doing better than drinking with Mike is hearing him speak. So I look forward to hearing what he's got to share with us today.
All right, Mike, you're on, my friend. Take the mouse and let's rock.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Harry. So let's get into GDPR. And, like many things, it's probably something that is similar to what you think it is. You may be surprised at what it isn't. But basically, it's a real game changer in our entire industry and all across the world. So GDPR stands for the General Data Protection Regulation, and it covers 28 European Union countries, and I'm including the UK in this. Even with Brexit, GDPR will continue to cover the UK if that goes through. And as Harry said, it recently became effective, May 25th of 2018. I was talking to several other people in the consulting business, and they said the same things that we're hearing, that they've had more contacts since the beginning of May than the previous 2 years when after GDPR had been announced and people were told they need to get ready for it. So now, as Harry said, the deadline's passed and now people are thinking about getting ready for it. So what is it? And then we'll get into kind of what it isn't. It's a data protection framework, and it's really different than many because it's not just talking about protecting the data, which HIPAA and other types of regulations discuss, but it provides individuals with data rights that they've never had before. And that also means that systems that have been used for many years to store information have had to be changed. Because if the individuals are exercising their rights, you now have to have mechanisms in place to be able to accommodate their requests. There's a worldwide enforcement mechanism. So the European Union is similar to all the states here in the U.S., where when the states have data breach laws, they believe that they protect the residents of those states, and in the case of GDPR of the countries, no matter where their data is stored. And that's a little bit controversial, and there are also some circumstances I'm going to talk about where it doesn't actually really take effect. But basically, there is a worldwide enforcement mechanism. So if you've got a client, for example, that's marketing to the European Union and they have to comply with GDPR, there are ways for the European Union and the enforcement agencies to get to them here in the United States. GDPR is also the basis for lawsuits, and it just started, so we really haven't seen a lot of activity yet. But when we look at other types of regulations, we work with HIPAA and other consumer protection regulations here in the United States. Every time there's a data breach, there's a lawsuit. And when it comes to the data breach announcements, usually within hours, class action suits are being filed. So don't just think of this as something that's enforced by a government or a regulatory body. It's become a standard. If an organization has to comply with GDPR and they don't, they should expect to be sued. And the reason they're going to be sued is that it's a standard they should have known about. They should have taken all the protection or all the precautions. And if they didn't and someone's information is breached, then that person has a right to go after them. It's the basis for reputational harm. You don't want your company's name associated with any sort of a regulatory penalty, but keep in mind GDPR is really across the world, and the penalties are huge. We'll talk about those in a minute.
Mike, if you don't mind, I'm going to just interject when I have a question. And folks, be sure to use the questions feature if you have questions. Mike, I actually have that question for you before I get to my question, but is it okay to interrupt you with questions, or would you prefer to get to a break point? Either way is fine.
Harry, feel free to ask me a question. The only thing I may say is that I'm going to cover that in an upcoming slide and ask you to wait. So go for it.
And my question is very simple. I just, as you were talking about the litigation and so on, in your humble opinion, do you think you're going to see patent troll type lawyers where people are going to go fishing for trouble, so then they can turn around and engage in litigation? It just you were using the kind of language that, you know, it seems like this is going to spawn an industry, man.
Well, it is, and we've seen this here in the U.S. where plaintiffs' attorneys, these are the attorneys that are that will go after a drunk driver, or if you're in an accident, they'll try to get more money from your insurance company. That's an entire industry to itself. Now, here in the U.S., there was a Supreme Court ruling in a case against or related to a company called Spokeo, Spokeo, that basically said, unless you can prove that you were harmed, the simple fact that your data was taken is not grounds for a settlement. It's not grounds for a legal case. There have been a lot of arguments to that, and I think we're going to see some more rulings coming out that may change that, where if your data is stolen, it doesn't have to be used today. But if someone keeps your data literally until after you die, they may be able to steal your identity and take advantage of that. So future harm is something that is being considered, but right now here in the U.S., the courts are not allowing those cases to go forward, basing it on the Spokeo decision.
Okay. Hey, one question from Jason Trong. Jason, thank you for your input. Jason, it's a pretty straightforward question. He says, do you think HIPAA will adopt the GDPR standards? It's a big question, but yes, no, top level.
That's coming, Harry. That's coming. So let me keep going a little bit more into the presentation.
Yeah. Go ahead. Good stuff. Thank you.
Sure. No, it's a great question. So here are the components of GDPR. First of all, personal privacy. And when we talk about personal, it's any data that an organization has on an individual. The individuals have the rights to access their personal data, correct errors, erase their personal data. And this has also been described as the right to be forgotten. Object to the processing of their personal data, and then be able to export it. So when you look at this and you realize how databases work and how companies work and things like that, this has been a huge tectonic shift in the way that data is stored, because what do you do when someone says, I want my information out of your system? And we were just talking to Robert at eFolder. Think about, the backups and things, so that if you contacted a vendor today and said, I want my name out of your system, and they take it out, and then their system crashes and they go back to recover from eFolder, the data's back in. So now how are you going to be able to track what things have occurred to make sure that people's information really has been removed and that it's not going to cause the company to be in trouble? So the personal privacy is huge. Controls and notification. So protect personal data using appropriate security. And I'm going to talk about what the standards are for this. I'm not going to get into all the security features and, the things have to be encrypted and so forth, because that's another, 4 or 5 hour conversation. But you have to protect the data using appropriate security. There's some flexibility in there that a small business obviously doesn't have to do the same level of security as a large international corporation, but it needs to be reasonable. You need to notify the authorities of breaches. You need to get consents for the processing of data. And that's one of the reasons why you were probably receiving emails recently saying, we've changed our privacy policy. Please click here to let us know that it's okay to continue to communicate with you. And then you need to keep records detailing data processing. And I know we've got a lot of IT people on this call. Throughout my history in the IT industry, I've met very few IT people who really like documentation. But when it comes to this regulation, documentation is pretty important. Transparent policies, and again, this is the reason your mailbox has been filling up. Clear notice of data collection practices. Why are you collecting the data? And then what are the data retention and deletion policies? And one of the messages that's come through with GDPR, which really every business should take heed of, whether or not they have to comply, is only collect data that you really need. Because if you have more data than you need for your business function, it's really creating unnecessary risk for you. IT and training. You need to train privacy personnel and employees. Audit and update data policies. Employ a data protection officer if required. I want to talk about what the requirements are moving forward, because I'm sure that'll be a question. And then create and manage compliant vendor contracts. Now, if you're looking at this and you're familiar with regulations like HIPAA, there's a lot of familiarity here. Create and manage compliant vendor contracts is the equivalent in HIPAA as a business associate agreement. And then employ a data protection officer. HIPAA calls it a security officer. So there isn't a lot here that's different, other than the big difference of the rights of the individuals and the changes to the systems and the policies that needed to be made. By the way, for those of you not familiar, the blue color and the stars, that's the flag of the European Union. So the penalties are pretty stiff. They can be 4% of gross worldwide revenues of an organization, or 20 million euros, whichever is higher. If you really screw up GDPR, you might go out of business. These penalties are huge. Now, we've not seen any yet because this just went into effect, but you can just imagine how fast they're going to want to start collecting, because this money will go back into enforcement. One question we get a lot here in the U.S. is, does GDPR apply to me? And the answer is yes, if you're a company or an organization that's marketing to the EU or the UK. I'll have another slide up here in a minute, but it doesn't mean that if you have information about a resident that you're automatically going to have to comply with GDPR. I'll explain that in a second. But if you're marketing to the EU or the UK, if you're selling products or services, and for example, here in the US, there are a lot of healthcare organizations and certainly tourism organizations that market to Europe and these countries that are covered because they want to bring in either medical patients or tourists. And I'm thinking of the larger healthcare facilities, for example, the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic might be organizations that will advertise, that they're the best heart hospital in the world or they've got the best treatment for a particular type of condition. And that's a worldwide marketing effort. Fundraising and development. So universities and charities will go across the world. And when I say charities, I'm thinking more, for example, if there's an association that's associated with a particular disease or medical condition, they may essentially be a worldwide organization because they do research, even if they're based here in the U.S., that is applicable worldwide. Associations and service organizations, and this one may be a little surprising, but if you're a member of a Rotary Club, for example, you know that Rotary Clubs will bring exchange students over from Europe to spend the summer, spend the school year, part of a school year here, and they may live with a local family, but they're actually soliciting and marketing into the European Union to get people interested to come here, and they're gathering the information on those folks. Education, and think more higher ed, but also in some K-12 programs, there are exchange student programs, again, where they're soliciting in Europe and marketing through organizations to bring kids over or students over to live here in the U.S. Social media platforms, and just, you think of the big ones. Obviously, there are no borders, and people worldwide are putting their data up there. And then data storage companies. So if you look at the sponsors here, cloud vendors, backup companies, data centers, where there may be information stored, and even if they're not soliciting to the European Union, they may have customers who are soliciting to the European Union and storing data in those environments.
Hey, Mike,
Yep.
With the slide transition, we're building up a few questions, so I don't want to get too far behind, and folks totally appreciate the interest. So David Sprague asked, and some of these may revert back to a prior slide, so that's why I don't want too much time to pass. But his question is, David says, will companies be allowed to charge individuals who want access to their personal data?
No.
Okay.
No.
Ken Schaefer out of the Salem, Oregon, Portland, Oregon area, always an attendee. Ken, good afternoon. Ken asked, when it comes to employees, what is considered personal data?
When it comes to employees, for example, in the European Union,
well,
covered by GDPR. I guess my question. So, I mean, we just think of it.
So how about the photos of my dog? I work as a W-2 employee for Amazon.com or whatever, or law firm X, and I have pictures of my dog, and they're on the company network, as tends to happen. Maybe if you think of it in those terms, what is personal data?
No, so personal data is data certainly about the individual. I'm not sure how the dog enters into this.
Clarification. Clarification. Excuse me. Ken types, the focus of GDPR seems to be on customers, but not. But what about employees? Okay, got it.
Oh yes, no,
customers understood.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that, Harry.
Okay.
That's one of the slides.
All right, and then we also have Rusty Brown. Yeah, Rusty Brown out of Jackson Hole. Rusty, you're asking a similar question. Mike, please continue, and we'll get to that. Thank you.
Okay, so here's one of the big questions. Does GDPR apply in the U.S.? So I'm going to go back a slide and say, yes, it does if you're marketing to the EU and the UK. But it doesn't if you collect some information about a resident of the European Union because they happen to have come here. And, for example, for a visit. So I was at the HIPAA summit earlier this year in Washington, And it was really focused, obviously, on HIPAA, but GDPR and state laws and other things were important topics there. And the attorneys for many of the hospitals and the healthcare providers here in the U.S. said that they've advised their clients that they're not covered by GDPR. And it's simply because they're not marketing any services into the European Union. So the picture I'm showing here, and the example is an injured tourist. So a tourist from the EU, a resident who at home, all of their information is covered by GDPR, comes here and twists their ankle and needs to go to an urgent care facility. The fact that they're going to give their personal information, their address, their contact information, of course the organization will have information about their medical conditions, does not mean that the organization suddenly has to comply with the GDPR. It's really a when in Rome rule. And as long as that organization is not marketing to tourists or to the UK and the EU for tourists to come and use their facilities when they're here in the US. So if it's just like a walk-in, and I use a local business as an example too, and let's say the local business has a little book you can fill out your name and your email address, to get their newsletter or to get some information about their products. As long as they're not marketing into the EU or UK, that does not trigger GDPR. So it doesn't mean that every business here in the US that has information about a European Union resident suddenly has to comply with GDPR. Now, why should you care? And this goes back, Carrie, to one of the earlier questions. Why should you care? Well, this is so big and this is so well thought out and organized that there's talk that the United States may eventually adopt GDPR, may become a worldwide standard. Right now, we have a lot of confusion here in the U.S. For the first time doing a webinar for you, I can say, Harry, that all 50 states now have data breach laws. It took a while, but Alabama and South Dakota finally got their data breach laws in place. Plus, we have HIPAA, the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act. We have PCI, which technically is not a law, but it's an industry requirement through the payment card industry for credit cards. The EU built the framework. They did the work. They did the heavy lifting. It would not be a huge issue for the United States to adopt this as a standard. And the reason that this may have some legs is states like California that have very strict data breach laws have not wanted Congress to come up with something that's really watered down. But it's likely that California would agree that the GDPR standards are strong enough to protect the California residents, and that they may allow the federal government to supersede the state laws of California and the other 49 states by adopting GDPR. It already applies to many U.S. companies. So there are large companies, most large companies market into the EU and the UK. And business is becoming more global. There's certainly no borders when it comes to data outside of a few countries that I can think of, maybe China and North Korea, where they've done things to block the internet. But business and data in particular are becoming much more global. So why should you care? Not just that it might happen to you, but GDPR may affect your clients, and it may be a great opportunity for you. It's an opportunity to sell compliance services. And in my history, compliance has been the biggest driver of higher priced services and stickiness with our clients compared to anything else we've ever done, including basic security services. Every MSP, every IT company offers basic IT services. Many offer security services. Fewer understand the compliance requirements and have taken the time to learn them to the point where they can really go to a client and say, we're going to help you comply with your regulations and do it with any sort of strength and ability. You can charge more for compliance services than basic IT services, and it gives you the ability to retain your clients. If they have to comply with GDPR, you're going to want them to keep them, and also to gain new clients. Part of this is just like learning a foreign language. You have to learn the language of GDPR and be conversant in it so that you can help someone comply. Harry?
All righty. So, Craig, I see you're on the line. Good afternoon, Craig. How are you doing from Intermedia?
Good afternoon, Harry. Very well, thank you.
Excellent.
Glad to be here.
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. And Craig, appreciate your support. Just for folks that joined late, and Craig, for your own edification, this is the MSP Tech Talk series. It's an academic quarterly system. So we got, winter, spring, summer, fall, just like college. And because of the generous support of our underwriters who have been trained to behave, such as Intermedia, it's because of your support that makes this academic lecture possible. And myself, SMB Nation, and the audience appreciates that. Craig, where are you located? Are you in the New York office, Bellevue, Washington, Bay Area? Where are you located, my friend?
Yeah, good question. No, I'm out of Mountain View, so our Northern California headquarters.
Okay, great. And it's my recollection, I understand you have a few slides, so we probably, Jenny, if you could make Craig the presenter, I believe.
Or I think we had uploaded them, so I think you've
uploaded them? Okay,
right.
Next, Mike, forgive me, folks. Next slide, please. And we will tape. There we go, my friend. So we want to talk about Intermedia. Sir, I'll go back on mute.
Okay. All right, well, thank you, Harry. Very excited to be working with you on this series of events. Obviously, this is something that we're very interested in. So let me tell you, my job is to help around industry solutions. I'm the director of industry solutions here at Intermedia. We're a cloud business applications company, and what that means is that we help partners provision clients with business cloud applications for a variety of capabilities, from voice and unified communications to file backup and file sharing, email and productivity apps. In a lot of cases with security and compliance features that address requirements, I'll talk a little bit about GDPR, but that are relevant to customers in your clients in different segments. And one of our hallmarks is to try to do all of this with a worry-free experience. We're very large. We've got over 1 million users, over 100,000 different customers across a wide range of industries, many thousands of partners that we support and that resell our services. And we're a large company. As Harry was indicating, we have offices in New York, in Mountain View and Bellevue and other locations to support our partners and our clients. We have a large focus on small businesses, and so a lot of what we're organized around doing is helping partners provide services to small businesses that are relying on the partner as a technical expert, in many cases to help them navigate some of the intricacies of what Mike was indicating about regulations. So if we can go to the next slide. As an example of this, one of the things that we've been focused on lately as part of our commitment to communication and collaboration is bringing different capabilities together into a new service offering called Intermedia Unite. And what this does is it helps partners bring to clients a system a set of services that is not just voice, but integrates voice, fax, desktop sharing, video conferencing, presence, chat, file collaboration, file backup into a set of services that you can provide to your clients, and that provision users with a very feature-rich tool set that deliver, what many people would call a true UCaaS solution, more than just voice, all of the related collaboration features that most users need for many of our mobile and distributed environments today. And so, the advantages of this are it helps you bring different capabilities together to provide a much higher value solution to clients. And this provides a lot of benefits to the client, and it also provides benefits to you. Next slide. But our real focus here in how we do this is to make you, as one of our partners, as an MSP, successful. Typically there's a lot of focus on technical support, but really what we've done is build throughout the entire sales and customer lifecycle an approach that helps our partners all the way along. Everything from how you start identifying opportunities, how you present the customer experience and services, pricing, all the way through ordering, training, cross-sell, and promoting other services to those same customers, and of course, technical support and onboarding. So basically, what we've tried to do is make it as simple as possible for partners to move into this area and have a start-to-finish solution that we're helping you with that makes your clients more productive and makes you and your team more productive in providing these kinds of solutions. Last slide.
Sounds reasonable. Yeah. Please continue.
So the reason that we're very interested in this and we're excited to be participating in this GDPR discussion is that this is an area, regulated industries, privacy and security controls that we've made a big investment in. You know, I mentioned we have 100,000 customers. We've got over 10,000 customers across just healthcare, finance, and legal, which tend to be areas that are very, very sensitive to privacy and security concerns. You know, healthcare is a very large, now we support other industries as well, and I think that's extremely relevant, as Mike was indicating in the GDPR discussion, because how GDPR affects you and affects you is very much a function of how it affects your clients. And as your clients are working across many different industries and with many different models and with contacts and organizations in many different locations, you know, the requirements are going to vary. But GDPR is a regulatory framework that's really much broader than any of these industries, but there are parts of it in terms of the security and privacy controls that have been very familiar to us, you know, particularly around HIPAA and many financial services controls, looking at how you protect confidential or certain types of customer information, how you manage the access to that, how you document what you're doing, and then how, from a cloud services provider standpoint, how we can help our partners present how that can protect them, how you can assure your clients, and then how we can provide the necessary legal agreements to support your reselling of cloud services into customers that are concerned about GDPR. And we're doing that today, just as we've done that with healthcare and supporting business associated agreements, and then also helping partners understand here's probably the right set of services to propose and how to use them and why. Again, our expertise is around how to use our cloud services to help address these regulatory concerns, you know, and then of course there's a lot of information that Mike and other people can provide from a more general practice standpoint about what you need to be doing. But we want to make sure that we're helping our partners provide their clients with the tools, information, assurances, and legal agreements that are necessary as you're providing cloud services to clients in any of these industries, and now in the context of GDPR.
Perfect.
Okay. So we're very, very excited to help.
Yeah. Well, Craig, we have a question. If now is a good time, then
Sure.
we'll get back to Mike. So Ken Schaefer, getting out of the Salem, Portland, Oregon area, friend of the family, runs the Technology Wizards partner group down there. Ken ask, how can we find out more about the specific functionality and features of the integrated system, specifically the PBX portion? I have a customer that desires to have a specific call flow capability and more in line with the old-fashioned efforts involving a receptionist and the ability to manage multiple incoming phone calls simultaneously rather than having an automated receptionist. That's a couple questions in one, but basically you're at the right slide. Ken's asking, how can I learn more?
Right. So you know, we have a great partner organization. So I think that in that initial slide there was a intermedia/reseller link, and so our approach is we guide our partners every step of the way. You have a dedicated partner manager who works with you to understand your business, and of course they understand our services, and they can help you navigate how to get to the information, obviously describe our services, and then, you know, if there are parts of this that they're not as knowledgeable regarding as you need, then they can bring me in to help on certain areas, whether it's healthcare or GDPR or finance. So my suggestion would be start with our partner support network, which is through that reseller link.
And we'll get the link. We're going to get the link to all the listeners. So folks, we'll get that in the thank you email. But I agree. Sorry to interrupt you, Craig, but yeah, that's a good first start.
We always appreciate the inquiry, and we're very excited to be working with you guys, and we're looking to help partners that want to learn more about this and build this into part of their business model.
All right. Well, Craig, with your permission, we'll turn it back over to Mike and get back to the academic GDPR content.
Great.
Lots of questions,
right,
Mike. Yeah, Mike, go ahead and get the mojo going, and then I'll interrupt you in a little while with some questions. Got about 5 stacked up.
Okay. So I want to hang on Craig's slide for just a minute, because if you look at this and you look at the healthcare and financial industries and all the requirements that they've had to meet up to now, GDPR, if they are a healthcare organization or financial that is marketing into the EU or UK, this is added on top of it. But the message to an MSP and really to all businesses in these environments, you don't have to go back and change everything from scratch. There are certain things like this right to be forgotten that's really new with GDPR. But a lot of the security controls that you already have in place will apply. And you don't go back and just blow everything up and start from scratch. If you're a healthcare organization that has to comply with HIPAA, or a financial organization that has to comply with, say, GLBA, which is the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act that protects personal financial information. So if you fill out like a mortgage application or something, you'd be protected by GLBA. That all the security controls, all the documentation, all the work you've done is going to help you comply with GDPR. It's not going back and starting again. So if you're an MSP and you're going, oh my God, I just figured out HIPAA, now I've got to learn GDPR. No, a lot of what you've done for HIPAA applies to GDPR. As I said a few minutes ago, looking through those steps, some of the things are just different words for the same types of requirements. As I was putting this presentation together, I was looking at the sponsors' websites because I wanted to see what information they had about GDPR. And I found this on SolarWinds' website, that they did a checklist. And they are showing anyone in the world that wants to find out what they've done for GDPR in very basic terms, what the items are. And my message to you is that it's easy to copy. Take their checklist and turn it into your checklist. So there's information there, and they've broken it down into 6 sections. Now, of course, there's a lot of detail in some of those, and if you look over at the compliance milestones, you'll see that there are multiple choices in that. But if you take something like this and start working with it as your checklist for GDPR compliance, somebody else has already done the work for you. So now let's get into some of the particular sections. And Harry, this is where I think I may be answering some of the questions. Feel free to jump in if there's a particular question about one of these topics. But privacy policy and the legal sections. First of all, clear and unambiguous notices. Now, this is something where we have laws in the U.S. here that also say that certain types of contracts and things need to be in plain text and understandable to the people, to consumers, for example, not just lawyers. So clear and unambiguous notices. The key concept to GDPR is transparency. You have to explain what data you collect, how you share it, and how long you keep it. And this, again, is a good message, and it applies across everything we do. I'm working with a client right now in a HIPAA situation. We scanned their network. We found a bunch of social security numbers in files from 2006 that are still floating around their network. Now, federal law for HIPAA and for Medicare say that they have to retain data for 6 years. This happened to be some employee information that they had. My first question is, why do you need it? Why do you still need to keep spreadsheets that you or files that you exported from a database in 2006, 12 years ago? And what happens, and now in today's world of cheap storage, You can go to Costco and buy a 5 terabyte drive for like $99 or something, and then you've got cloud services. In fact, some cloud services will give you free storage. But it doesn't mean you should hang on to all that information. GDPR makes you think about it, and it's a smart thing. Why do you keep it for as long as you keep it? There has to be contact information so that the individuals can contact your organization and tell them that they want to inspect their data, they want to amend it, or they want to have it removed. And they do have the right to withdraw consent. So even if they said today that it's okay to communicate with me, next week they can change that. When we get to data protection and security, this is Pandora's box that I said earlier.
Hey, Mike?
Yes.
Mike, yeah, if you don't mind, since we just had a slide transition, let's do that poll question for intermedia. My bad. And Jenny, if you want to go ahead and kick that up. And while we're doing that, folks, be sure to continue asking your questions. I'll let you read the screen. That's self-apparent. We are, oh boy, I've got a lot of questions queued up. Folks, I'm going to do the best I can. I want to get the core information out and then circle on the backside on the questions. But in any event, do you already have service agreements to support GDPR or HIPAA compliance from your managed service provider vendors? Okay, Jenny, let's get some results. We'll go ahead and close out that poll. And it looks like 81% no. 44% yes on HIPAA, 13% on GDPR. Probably not a big surprise, Mike, since GDPR is a relatively new concept. Okay, Mike, why don't we knock out one or two questions,
sure.
If you don't mind. So Sean Betts asked, and thank you for being patient, Sean, about 20 minutes ago. What about something like an accounting firm that doesn't market to the EU, UK, but were sought out by a EU resident for USA taxes?
So I think is the question, do they have to comply with GDPR? I'm assuming that's the rest of the question?
Yeah.
I don't believe so, but that would be a question for the accounting firm, because that's really a legal opinion. That if they're sought out here in the U.S., as I've said before, it was really a discussion more about healthcare organizations, but the message was if someone walks in from the EU and wants your services, that does not mean that you have to suddenly comply with GDPR.
Okay. Ed Hyde asked, does having a website accessible to the EU nations constitute marketing to the EU? If so, will a statement on the website stating we are only marketing to the U.S. be sufficient?
Well, no, I think the first part of that question is that just because you have a website, I mean, anybody's website can be viewed across the world, to my knowledge, other than some countries that are blocking access, that no, it doesn't mean that just because you have a website you have to comply. It's similar to a question we get about HIPAA, and that is for example, an employer. If an employer gets a letter from a doctor that says, Dear Harry, Jenny can't come to work tomorrow because she strained her back, that does not mean, Harry, that you have to comply with HIPAA all of a sudden because you have a letter from a doctor. Now, the same information in the doctor's files is protected by HIPAA, but they specifically exempted businesses from having to comply with HIPAA. Otherwise, everyone would have to comply with HIPAA. So just because your website can be seen by someone in the EU, and even if they contact you, does not mean that you're marketing to the EU.
Okie dokie. Let me just look over the. Ken, I'll get back to your question next break. Mike, please continue.
Okay. And I didn't say it before, but for our viewer in Dublin, my daughter is touring Ireland as we speak and sent me an email earlier saying she was going to the Jameson distillery. So if you see my daughter stumbling through Ireland, please tell her hi from her dad. So,
well, you should have a family rule, no Instagramming while drinking.
Well, it's like what we say in Vegas. What happens in Vegas stays on Facebook.
There you go.
So let's talk about data protection and security. The first thing is reduce your exposure. And the easiest way to not have to contact a bunch of people and ask if it's okay to continue to store their information is to remove their information. So if you've got databases, as I said a few minutes ago, just full of old unused information, just get rid of it. If you don't need it for business purposes, then you don't have to deal with it and try to protect it under GDPR. Moving forward, minimize data collection. It's just the data you need for your business. And finally, you need to implement security controls. Here in the U.S., there are several different types of control frameworks. So we have HIPAA specific. The security rule has about 50 items within it that you have to do to protect health information. And here in the U.S., we have NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. And NIST puts out guidance on how to protect information. For government agencies, there's a publication called 800-53 for defense contractors and people that are working with their own information that relates to government contracts. It's not classified information. There's 800-171, and all businesses are recommended to use the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CSF, and that's just been updated to version 1.1. But when it comes to GDPR, it's an international standard, it's an international regulation, and ISO 27001 is basically the standard set that the European Union expects organizations to adopt. So it takes a while. ISO is complicated. It can be expensive to implement. Easily it'll take 6 months, could take as long as a year to fully implement the full ISO standard. But when we talk about security controls, if you want to look at what applies to GDPR, you really should be looking towards ISO 27001. Now, one of the requirements in GDPR is a data protection officer, or a DPO. And the first thing is that not every organization needs a DPO. Now, if you look at this, you may think that I've misspelled some words. I didn't. I actually copied the information from the European Union website, and they spell organization with an S, while we here in the U.S. use a Z or a Z. And if you look at the word offenses, it has a C in it. That's not my misspelling. That's the difference between some words that we spell differently than they spell in the EU and the UK. So who needs a data protection officer? All public authority and bodies, especially government agencies and departments. And then if the core activities of the organization consist of data processing operations. So if you're, say, a manufacturing company that's doing work for a UK or an EU business, and you're doing, contracting for them, unless you're a data processing operation, you don't need to have a DPO. But if you're in the healthcare business or personal data relating to criminal convictions or offenses, then you do have to have a data protection officer. The good news for an MSP is that the DPO role can be outsourced. It could be you. You could offer a service to organizations here in the U.S. that have to comply with GDPR for you to be the outsourced data protection officer. But before you go and say, okay, I'm going to do that, let's just go through what that means. And also, there's going to be a question about liability. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So DPO's responsibilities: educating the company and employees on important compliance requirements, training staff involved in data processing. Now, of course, this doesn't necessarily mean you're doing the training itself. You may be able to bring in consultants or buy training programs, but you're responsible for it. Conducting audits to ensure compliance and address potential issues proactively. Serving as the point of contact between between the company and the GDPR supervisory authorities. Monitoring performance and providing advice on the impact of data protection efforts. Maintaining comprehensive records of all data processing activities conducted by the company, including the purpose of all the processing activities. That's why you need the data, which may be made public on request. And finally, interfacing with those data subjects. Those are the individuals to inform them about how their data is being used, their rights to have their personal data erased, and what measures the company has put in place to protect their information. There's a lot here. And the first thing I'll tell you is if you're going to do this, and this is similar to the discussion I had when I was asked to be the CIO of a hospital, I told the CEO, you're asking me to do a lot of things. You need to make sure I've got the budget and the authority to make this stuff happen. So I negotiated both a budget and my authority within the org chart, and it was basically situational authority. It didn't mean that I was above the CEO on the org chart, but it did mean that he agreed to follow all of the security controls that we put in place and lead by example. So when you look at this, it may seem easy, yes, you can do it, but realize that you aren't going to be successful as a DPO unless you have some budget, and you're also not going to be successful unless you have some authority to make sure that people are actually doing these things. We get the question about HIPAA and all regulations, including GDPR, about, well, what's my liability? I'm a managed service provider. What's my liability under this? Well, the first thing is that you have to do the right things yourself, and MSPs do different things. And what I mean by that is some MSPs are simply setting up backups and doing patches and updates and things like that, while others have their own data centers or they're storing data and providing more services where they're protecting data or they're storing data that needs to be protected. So it may vary, but this is, again, an opportunity for you. It's also a great thing that you may want to look at if you're offering chief information services, or if you're offering outsourced CIO services. Because if you look at this job description, other than a couple references, or one reference to GDPR, it really has to do with a lot of the things that any MSP would want to offer to a business client. So here are some of the rights of the individuals, and we talked about this before. They have the right to access their data and understand how it's being processed. That means, where it's being stored and who's getting access to it. Erasure, where they have the right to withdraw consent and ask for their personal data to be deleted. Data portability. And this is really a big thing because this is what the U.S. healthcare industry has been trying to accomplish for years, which is transferring personal data from one electronic processing system into another one. Here in the U.S., that's called interoperability, and they've been trying to get it through healthcare and not been successful, but it's a fundamental requirement of GDPR that data has to be exportable, I guess is the term, or portable, in the way that you can take it from one system to another. People have the right to look at their data and make changes to it. And again, as the consumer, they have to be informed in clear and plain language that they can withdraw their authority for you to use their data and to store it at any time. There's some links down here and some sources at the very end. I'm going to go through some resources that you can get or you can go to for some more information.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Yeah,
go ahead, Harry.
I just made up a question in my own mind. I do have a couple queued up, folks. I'm going to get to them. But the question I made up was, this sounds a little bit like that last slide you had with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what have you, is it kind of sounds like how you might interact with Equifax or Experian on a credit report, the ability to make a correction. I mean, I know the analogy is not 100%, but it just, you were using some of the same language, like the way I might interact with a credit bureau, right? Like the right to make a correction. Does that make sense? I maybe not.
Sure. Well, okay. Harry, you have that right under HIPAA to look at your medical records, and the right to make changes means that when you say there's a mistake there, and this has been an issue in healthcare, for example, where people have said, I think that information is incorrect, and the doctors even disagreed, but they've left the original information intact and then added added to it the client's, or in the case of doctors, a patient's comments that they don't believe this information is accurate. So this does give the individual a lot of rights, and Harry, you and I are both old enough, notice I put and I in there, to remember that, before HIPAA, our doctors really owned our medical records, and they didn't even have to share them with us. So under HIPAA, we suddenly got the right to get a copy of our records. Doctors could have said no up to that point. That was a game changer in healthcare here in the U.S., and like I said, this is a game changer in the EU and across the world. And when you look at this, there are two ways to look at it, but look at it, if you're the consumer. So if you're the consumer, don't you think that organizations that have your data should give you those rights? And this is where there could be even a ground roots, a lot of people here in the U.S. saying, I want those rights. Ground roots effort, I guess is the word I was looking for, get the U.S. government to adopt this, because the costs would be in making the changes to systems so that they could accommodate these rights. But other than that, isn't this something that you and I would want anyway? Yeah. If you found an error in some database, wouldn't you want to have the authority to make somebody change it, or have a law behind you that said they have to change it?
No, I don't get me going, but you've answered my question.
Okay.
All right, please continue, my friend. And folks, I am going to get to those questions at a natural break point. Thank you, Mike.
Okay, you're welcome. So this is an area, data management and mapping, that that GDPR requires, and it's really a component of every cybersecurity framework that I've ever seen. And this is also an area where people have done a pretty bad job. And I'm going to include MSPs in this. And even when I was an MSP, we had a hard time with this. Where is data? And what it gets down to is you can't protect data if you don't know where it is, or if you don't have some sort of control of it. And we have a lot of clients, for example, in the healthcare business, that say all of our patient information is in our electronic health record system, or all of our information is in the cloud, or in manufacturing. All of our information is in our manufacturing system. It's simply not true. If you look at PCs and laptops in those organizations, you're going to find that people saved things locally, or they exported data out of the electronic health record system into an Excel spreadsheet or into a PDF file, and they're storing that either locally on a PC or in their share on a server or something else. But GDPR requires you to identify the locations of data. In today's world, you've got PCs, laptops, servers, but you also have portable data like thumb drives, even SD cards, portable hard drives. And then we get into the cloud. Just look at the sponsors of this event today, and you have to be able to map out where that data is, and under GDPR be able to do all the things that we've talked about, for example, removing an individual's information. You should classify it. And one of the things that's really important here, data classification really can go crazy in terms of all the different types of data you have. But if you look at any organization, including your own, and if you go back and you'll remember that I said all 50 U.S. states have data breach laws. You have information in your own systems that need to be protected against your state data breach law. And what are the classifications? It could be simply just binary, two choices. It's either protected data or it's not protected data. And the reason that classification could make sense is that if you can segregate protected data from unprotected data, you don't have to secure your entire system. You may only have certain areas. If you don't have a lot of protected data, you might be able to put it someplace in a secure area of a server, for example, or have even a VLAN and use your network to segregate or to segment who can gain access to it. And then after you identify the locations and figure out the classifications of the data, how does it flow through an organization? And that can mean how is it stored, who has access to it. But again, when you look at even the sponsors today, how is it backed up? Who has access to those backups? What happens if the hurricane that Harry was talking about occurs and now you have to recover, and maybe you've relocated to a different physical location because your community was evacuated? All of those things have to be considered when you're doing data management and data mapping. So this question came up before. What about employees? And this is a quote that came from Microsoft in some of their information about GDPR. And notice it's not just about customer data. The program manager at Microsoft said our employee data is almost as expansive as our customer data. We not only had to identify all the areas we store HR data, but also where we had personally identifiable, they spelled identifiable wrong, information, like on user devices and building security logs, dining services, CRM, and Microsoft Office. The strong message here when you look at Office and you look at Microsoft is think about Office 365 and all the data that could be stored there, because you have the ability to share files, you have the ability to create servers up in Microsoft, as well as the information that may be in an email or attached to an email or even a voice message. And when you looked at the intermediate slide about that unified communications platform, just think of here in the U.S. of medical information that could be stored there and controlled or governed by HIPAA, or if it's information about an EU subject that has to be protected under GDPR. Awareness and training is critical, and depending on the size and scale of the organization, it can be a big challenge. But one of the key things about awareness and training is that you really need to have good documentation that this occurred, because if you're going to get audited for GDPR, or if you're going to get sued, for example, that you announced a data breach and now you're being sued, you want to have records. And these are more than just sign-in sheets, and you may have to go back years to show that the people involved with protecting that data had received their proper training. You want to train them in regulations, in data protection, and breach notification. I'm in upstate New York today. I just spoke at the New York State Cybersecurity Conference, and Verizon did a presentation on the Verizon data breach study for the year. And they talked about something that was very interesting. And this is kind of an aside, but when it comes to awareness and training, many of you may be offering phishing training, where you send phishing messages to people at a business, and then those that click on it need to get some education, and this is part of your managed services. The guy from Verizon said that they have measured the effectiveness of that type of training, and first of all, it's very effective. They can see just graphically a dramatic decrease in the number of people that are clicking on phishing messages. And it was a funny term. He got it down. He said that it gets down to the chronic clickers, that at some point you're going to be training people that just will still click on anything and there's nothing you can do about it. That may be dealt with as an HR issue. But the one thing he did say is that they've done studies that show that if you take away that training, so if you do the training and you can get the click rate on a phishing message down to even single digits within a company, so that fewer than 10% of the people will click on a phishing message because they've been trained, that if you take that training away for like 3 months and then you start sending phishing messages out again to try to bait them, over 60% of the people will click on them again. So this is something, I'd not heard that statistic before. If you're offering this kind of training, then you want to make sure it's repeated on a regular basis, because that's how you maintain the effectiveness. It's probably like going to the gym, where once you get in shape and you keep going back to stay in shape, but if you get out of shape, then it's going to take a long time to get back into shape.
Well, and Mike, what I would tell you is it's a lot like writing. Folks, if you hit my Instagram or Facebook, you'll see I had occasion to go to mini storage yesterday and get some stuff, and I found a 1991 cover story I did where I interviewed Howard Schultz of Starbucks and named Starbucks the top best company in the state of Washington, yada, yada, yada. But Mike, it made me think, and taking your athletic club example, I guess the reason I still type in the morning is it's a muscle. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just, sheesh, man. If I get away from typing, I get away from writing, I get the document one, phobia. A few months later, it's like, oh God, what do I say? But Mike, if you don't mind, let's knock out a few questions. We've had some folks being awfully darn patient.
So, Harry, this is one of my last slides. Do you want me to finish, or do you want me to?
Yeah. Go ahead and finish. So, folks, hold on to your horses, and then we'll hit. We got a lot of them, Mike. Okay, go ahead, Mike.
Okay. So the last thing here is data breach notification. 72 hours to report to authorities, and there are authorities all across the world, including here in the U.S. There's contact information, the nature of the breach, the name and contact details for your organization's data protection officer, the likely consequences of the breach. For example, is it likely to have the data has actually been accessed? And then the measures taken or proposed to be taken by the data controller to address the breach and mitigate its adverse effects. So data breach notification is required here as part of this, and it kind of wraps up what you would expect, that you do everything to protect against the breach, but there are requirements to report. And this is something that many organizations just find really painful to report data breaches, because it can bring bad things on them, but it's the world we live in. And sometimes we have to tell people that we did bad things and suffer the consequences. Here's something that just came out. If you look at this, this was from Law 360, just June 4th this week, that talks about the consent disputes are the first GDPR battlefield. And it's I highlighted section that says Silicon Valley heavyweights, Facebook and Google, have already been accused of breaching GDPR. Now, the GDPR came into effect May 25th of 2018, and June 4th of 2018. You're already seeing Google and Facebook now. That's not surprising because of their deep pockets. But that here's what they're being accused of: by only allowing consumers to access services after they agree to the terms of service. In other words, they're saying we won't let you get to your own data or use our service unless you agree to our terms and conditions. I'm not going to argue the libertarian point of view on this or whatever, but what I'm showing you is that we're just now starting to see not really enforcements, but accusations, which I'm sure will turn into lawsuits, and the lawsuits will move faster than the regulatory bodies will in terms of making their decisions and their adjudications. Here's some resources, and Harry's going to share the slides with you so you don't have to remember these. And obviously where it says click here, you can't see the long links that I shortened to the click here and put in hyperlinks. But these are from the sponsors that we had today, plus Microsoft, because they had a lot of good information, and I know a lot of you work with Microsoft, if not all of you. And then the official site for GDPR. And I'm going to wrap here, and then we'll take the questions. It's not a GDPR book, but if you're looking at regulatory compliance and you've got clients that have to comply with HIPAA or really any other regulations, I'll give any of you a free copy, both a printed copy and an electronic copy of my book, How to Avoid HIPAA Headaches. And all you need to do is text Harry to 844-335-3635. You'll get a link, and then fill out the address information on that link so we know where to send your book. And with that, Harry, I can take any questions. Hopefully I can answer them.
I'm tempted to give my son's mobile phone number over the air and have you text Harry just as a prank, because he's deep in finals and will be done next week at Cal Poly. I can't. I can't do that, although it would be kind of funny. But all right, so I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to work my way up on the questions, folks. Be sure to use the questions feature in your control panel to ask your questions. So we have longtime listener and participant Alan Brinker. Alan Brinker asked a little while ago, does GDPR apply to any level of companies that don't have any personal info?
I don't think, well, first of all, every company has personal info, even just on their employees and things. But if you don't have personal info, if you're here in the U.S., for example, and you don't have personal info on anyone residing in the European Union or the U.K., then GDPR would not apply to you. I'm not sure exactly what that question meant. or what the context would be.
Yeah, and Alan, feel free to clarify. Okay, cool. And then we have Ken asking, it's similar to a question we had earlier. I'm going to go ahead and read it. So Ken Schaefer asks, how many levels down does the regulation apply to? For example, i.e., if we are marketing a U.S.-based company that has one or more customers in the EU, UK, i.e., a second level down. So let me try that again. We're marketing a U.S.-based company that has one or more customers apparently residing in the UK or EU, and he calls that a second level down. Does that make sense? And Ken, happy to bring you on microphone again, as we've done in the past. You've always been a good citizen. Let ping Jenny on chat if you'd like to come live. Was that question sufficient?
Well, I think so. So I'm assuming Ken's an MSP and that he's got a client that does have to comply. Is that what you understand, Harry?
Yeah. And Ken, I understand you're not at a microphone right now. Thank you for the side note. Ken, do you want to feel free to retype that if Ken, if you want to clarify?
So let me answer it in this way. If you have a client that has to comply with GDPR, then you're pulled into it in terms of having to be a vendor that can support their needs. Doesn't mean that you are going to store the data, but this is my challenge area, is that there are some MSPs that are saying, we offer rack space, we offer our own cloud storage and things. So it's hard to pay MSPs with the same brush. But unless you're actually storing the data, there's probably not much that you have to do to comply.
Okay, great. Yeah, it sounds like it's less. We're an industry of hype, right? And everybody gets all, Y2K. Not to age us, Mike. Mm-hmm. There's some people on the line that didn't actually work in the Y2K era.
They may not have lived in the Y2K era. I spent that New Year's Eve in a command center with a bunch of people from law enforcement and government and prison systems and everything, hoping that systems wouldn't go down. So.
Yeah, we were hosting an end-of-the-world party at a ski condo that night, and what do you know, the sun came up the next morning. But next question concerns liability insurance. So what are you hearing from underwriters? I mean, speaking of Europe, Lloyd's of London would be the perfect example. But, sir, what say you in terms of what you're hearing in terms of insurance markets and what do they call it, remarketing, and how they're always selling to each other? What's the scoop on getting reinsurance? What's the scoop on getting protection for GDPR, my friend?
Well, I don't know about anything specific to GDPR, but I can tell you that there are really two kinds of insurance, particularly that an MSP ought to be looking at. One is just E&O, errors and omissions insurance generally, that protects you against doing something wrong or having something that you're providing not work. And Robert talked earlier from eFolder about working with them to make sure that backups are tested and things like that. It's one of the classic examples where MSPs get messages every day, backup was successful and all that, and then they go to restore it and it didn't work for some reason. So that's a reason why you should have insurance, because I know of a case where an MSP was able to get his E&O insurance to pay to have one of their clients' information rekeyed by hand when they couldn't recover a backup. So E&O insurance is something that every MSP ought to have, but there's also, and I've heard two different names for it, data breach insurance or cyber liability insurance. And these are new lines of insurance that will protect you specifically related to regulatory compliance. And what I would do is talk to the agent, and this is what I've done, is talk to my agent. Harry, you mentioned Lloyd's. We do so much work in compliance that it wasn't possible for us to get the protection we needed by buying a standard policy that an MSP would buy. So we went to an insurance agent who went to Lloyd's of London with our description of our business and the types of services and what our revenues were and all that, and came back with a custom policy for us And the funny part was it was less than what I'd been paying as an MSP. And part of it was that we don't handle equipment. We don't offer the same types of services that an MSP does. But cyber liability insurance is absolutely something that you want to look at.
Okay, great. And then 3 more questions have rolled in, 2 clarifications. Mike, what I'm doing, and tell me if you can see this, I've sent you a private chat. So on the GoToWebinar chat, if you could read the questions and answer the questions, and the reason I say that is my tongue's not working today. These are long questions, so feel free to paraphrase and answer. Thank you, Mike.
Okay. So it says here, we don't work directly with EU and UK customers, but if we have customers who do, or if they have customers that do, are we affected by the regulations? That was the question before. And the answer is you might be. And the reason for that is that if your client has to comply with the regulation, all the regulations, and I'm not just talking about GDPR, but if you're dealing with, say, someone that's doing work for defense contractors and they're a subcontractor, the regulations that apply to the general contractor flow down to the subcontractor, and if you're providing the company with services, our MSP company helped a company that made the clutches for the space shuttle doors. I never knew that space shuttle doors had clutches, but we had to go by certain regulations because our client had to also. So that to me is a yes. This section, the next question is, the U.S. company is not going to have personnel info on people from a company in, say, Great Britain, but they may be selling them widgets. Or if a company is doing accounting for a company but not their payroll, must they comply? I don't think so, because in this situation, it doesn't sound like there's going to be information about EU or UK individuals. If you're selling widgets, then you probably aren't going to have their information. For example, if you took credit card information, then you're going to have a credit card number, but I don't think you're collecting information about individuals. It says here, you're not doing their payroll, so I'm going to assume that that's the case. There's no individual data. Next one says, I work for a public school district in the U.S. We sometimes employ people to teach French. They're French nationals who are in the U.S. on a work visa. They're residing in the U.S. temporarily while they teach in our schools. Usually they return to their homes in Europe during the summertime. Is our school district required to implement GDPR because of these employees? I'm not sure, and here's why. That the whole concept of GDPR is that it applies to people that are marketing to Europe. So my question would be, where did the teacher, what did they do to come to the U.S.? And the reason I'm asking that is when I had my MSP business, we worked with an internship program that actually went all across the world and solicited and did the marketing and brought the interns to us. And of course, they shared their information with us. I think in today's world, that the company that brought us the interns would be governed by GDPR, and we probably would be too, if we were bringing in an intern from the EU or the UK. So I think in that case, in the case of the school district, the answer is yes. Now, I'll also tell you that a school district has to comply with FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, that protects student information. And FERPA, the controls that you would put in to protect student information would also easily apply to this situation to protect the European Union residents' information if they're a part-time or a temporary French teacher. That was it for questions, Harry.
Yeah. So, and thank you. And again, great question. So long that I would have done a disservice to be man in the middle and ask them. Folks, I'm going to give a last call for questions. We are just a couple minutes out from closing time, as it were. In 2 weeks, we return with the security lecture. And then the following week, so we slip it all in Q2 or spring quarter. Folks, you may recall, unfortunately, back in April, the cryptocurrency conversation. So this is an MSP in Michigan who mines Bitcoin. And so he's one of us doing something really cool at night. And he's going to come talk about that. And you may recall that he actually had a family tragedy and subsequently went to the hospital for several days and was put on bed rest. So we appreciate your cooperation. We rescheduled him from early mid-April out to late June. He's doing great. And if you want the context of why are we talking cryptocurrency, well, A, it's an MSP who's doing it, and then B, it tied into the blockchain lecture that we had in late April. So Mike, there was actually a method to the madness, and then the real world kicked in. So we're going to catch our friend on the rebound. Let's see. We have one. Ken says, "Thank you, Mike and Harry." We'll take this as the final word. We have Jason Trung asking, do CPAs fall under FINRA, FINRA, or do they need to comply? If that makes sense. I'm not a CPA, Mike.
Well, I'm not either. And FINRA, I think, has more to do with investments and things, but CPAs have all sorts of compliance requirements because they have the mother lode. They have, tax returns with social security numbers on them. They audit healthcare organizations. Keep in mind, CPAs spend a lot of time auditing other businesses, and they audit healthcare organizations. So they're often looking at patient records. That means they have to comply with HIPAA, as well as ethical requirements to keep information confidential. So, Harry, I'm going to double check on the FINRA question. I'll get back to you, and then you can share it.
Yeah, if you could, Jen. No, thanks, Mike. Jenny, if you want to make a note, let's hold the thank you note. Mike, we typically send that out tomorrow, but if keep us posted, yes or no, and we'll hold the note till we hear back from you. Folks, okay. I do want to give a shout out to SolarWinds, our third sponsor, longtime sponsor of SMB Nation. Just as it sounds, you'll get some information on SolarWinds tomorrow, but we appreciate their support. And right now, SolarWinds is having a conversation with the SMB Nation community on Mail Assure. So an email spam filter, phishing, anti-phishing solution, and so on. With that said, the deck is clear. We are at time. Mike, thank you so much for coming from us from Albany, New York, where you're just got out of speaking at a government-related security conference. And Mike, where might people see you in the next couple of months? Or are you going to be at DataCon or Automation Nation? Are you going to be at Microsoft Inspire? Are you going to be at CompTIA? Where might we see you?
Right now, I know for sure I'm going to be at CompTIA ChannelCon, and I'll be at a bunch of events through the summer and towards the end of the year, but I don't have my calendar in front of me to even tell you what all of them are, Harry.
Yeah, no problem. All right. Well, thanks again. Always a pleasure. Folks, have a great day. We'll see you in 2 weeks for a security lecture in the MSP Tech Talk series. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.